Treyarch's next Call of Duty Zombies game, the sequel to Black Ops Cold War and the next chapter in the Dark Ether saga, is rumoured to release in 2024. Since it is a while away, we have limited official information just yet, but judging what we know from Vanguard and Black Ops Cold War, we can make a lot of educated guesses as to what occurs from here, storyline-wise. The ending of Vanguard Zombies has been regarded by some as unsatisfactory, as it leaves many questions, but given what we know from Cold War, it helps us to fill in the gaps. In this video, I want to go over literally everything we know about the mode thus far, both storyline and gameplay-wise, as we slowly near closer to its long-anticipated release. By the time that the game eventually comes out, Zombies could have been on the longest break yet, and this break is very much needed after the disastrous Vanguard Zombies. Treyarch need to recoup, reinvent, revitalize, and have adequate time to produce a Zombies iteration that'll be remembered for generations. The campaign/multiplayer has had many leaks, with it pointing to it being set around the 90s/early 2000s, with it potentially covering the Gulf War. Before we go into the storyline setup for the sequel to Cold War Zombies, I first want to go over what we know gameplay-wise about the mode. The things we know about COD 2024 Zombies so far is that Outbreak is returning, with Treyarch confirmed to be working on a new Warzone map. That could very well be what the mode is played on. Other than that, we have no details on what it'll actually entail though. Round-based is also returning and is not going anywhere, and has been described as apparently being a fresh take on the mode. Treyarch have been hiring many new staff for Zombies. They have also self-admittedly said that they want to bring back harder Easter eggs after outcry from the hardcore community about the difficulty of Easter eggs in Cold War Zombies, but they still want to retain the Cold War Zombies style quests, whilst they are easier to follow and more accessible for all fans so that the general audience can all follow the main storyline, as before Cold War Zombies, the main story was sanctioned off to a very tiny percentage of the community. The only way most of the fans would get access to the story was by watching YouTube videos and not physically in-game, and Treyarch wanted to change that. They essentially were no longer Easter eggs but mini campaigns, where the game would guide you through via its dialogue and audio prompts. So as to what they mean by bringing back harder Easter eggs, this could be in the form of harder side quests, or even a second main quest with a casual and hardcore experience similar to World War II Zombies, but I think this is less likely due to them not wanting to sanction off large parts of the story from a big portion of the player base, so we may just get more complex side quests next game. I just hope that they have good replay value and worth it rewards, or even the possibility of do-it-once side quests where you get a permanent reward in all future games, such as different starting weapons, cheaper war buys, a free mystery box spin, higher ray gun look, etc. With many from the community essentially wanting Treyarch to emulate Black Ops 3 again, they have said that they always want to move forward and try new things instead of solely trying to recreate the past. You never can fully recreate the past as times and circumstances change. It doesn't mean we can't get things for nostalgia purposes though. Kevin Drew, who is in charge of the gameplay systems in Cold War Zombies, has been promoted to a lead role, so I think the mode is in good hands, as I feel that the innovations and streamlines of the gameplay systems in Cold War Zombies was its biggest success to get a lot of those free-to-play players over from Warzone over to Zombies. He's also been with the mode for a long time, working on such maps as Mob of the Dead and Blood of the Dead, as well as Zetsubo no Shima and Ancient Evil, with Ancient Evil and Mob of the Dead being very well received. That's pretty much all of the confirmed gameplay information we have so far, but in terms of the storyline, we know that it'll be taking place in the 90s, similar to the campaign, 5 years after the events of Black Ops Cold War, and that's what I want to delve in depth into in a little second, but first I have an awesome message to share with you. This video has been kindly sponsored by Software Keep, which provides digital software products including Windows 10, Windows 11, Microsoft Offices, and antiviruses for much cheaper than the retail price. If you are in need of Office or other softwares, browse their site. The average customer saves 25% as Microsoft overcharges. What's more is that you receive a lifetime year-round protection on all purchases, as Microsoft only provides monthly or yearly subscriptions. Buy once, use forever, because you are worth it. They offer digital keys with top-notch 24/7 customer support with a 30-day money-back guarantee, whereas Microsoft has no refund policy. All your purchases are secure and safe with the lifetime product guarantee. They have over 100,000 customers which have rated their service 5 stars, so join them today by checking them out via the link in the description, and get an additional 20% discount if you use the code TGR20. So where does the storyline take place in the sequel to Black Ops Cold War? In 1990, 5 years after the events of capturing the Forsaken, a hooded man approaches a Japanese fisherman and requests to rent a boat to a place off the island nation's eastern coast. When the fisherman says there is nothing there and asks what he is looking for, Dr. Peck, now severely burnt but still alive, responds that he's searching for some old friends, likely referring to Weaver, Strauss, Carver, and Gray, potentially Samantha Maxis too. It's likely that he wants to travel to the spot in in the Pacific Ocean where the Operation Inversion warheads laid, where the walls between the world and the Dark Ether may be weakened. This took place within the first Outbreak main quest. That is where the Cold War Zombie story leaves us on, a cliffhanger, wondering whether or not Dr. Peck will have a redemption arc as a protagonist, considering he has extensive knowledge on Eddie Richtofen since he was a mole in Omega for him, before he realized the identity of the director of Requiem is in fact Eddie Richtofen. Alternatively, or simultaneously, this could also be the site of Black Site 13, where the strike team are being held captive. The Requiem heads may be present here too, or being held in a separate location. This could be a spot similar to where Samantha Maxis was being interrogated in Block 8, where they may be experimenting on them. The strike team were exposed to large amounts of Ethereum throughout Cold War Zombies, and this exposure may give them minor Dark Ether abilities, potentially allowing them to use the equivalent of the Ones or the Dark Ether artifact abilities merely through their minds and no longer having to use an external device or artifact. This could be the new field upgrade system next game. It's very well possible that this spot in the Pacific, be it Black Site 13 and or the site where the inversion missiles were diverted, could be the launch map for the next game. More evidence of this is the fact that we have the map Ashika Island in Warzone that takes place on a Japanese island in the Pacific. We know that during the mid-1990s, due to something unknown and not publicly disclosed, something happened here to hold the development of the island, and access to it has been heavily restricted ever since. This could have something to do with whatever Peg is up to in the Pacific. A zombie outbreak could have spread there due to the inversion warheads, or it could be unrelated to zombies and could tie into the campaign for Treyarch's next game, maybe something to do with Perseus. Now, before I go further, I want to recap you on Samantha Maxis and Eddie Richtofen, both of whom are the only remaining survivors of the old Ether story, as they step through into the new universe to begin new lives at the end of Tag der Toten, as the multiverse collapsed into the Dark Ether, leaving only but one singular linear universe. A lot of what I'm about to discuss regarding Sam and Eddie's early lives are merely inferences. Whilst likely very close to actuality, there may be some discrepancies. Once Eddie did reappear in the new universe, it seems likely that he and Samantha parted ways relatively early in their lives, as she mentions growing up in an orphanage in Germany alone. The orphanage she spent her time in, as well as the university she went to as an adult, Heidelberg, are both the same orphanage and university that prior universes Richthofen's went to. This thematic swap allows us to speculate that Eddie's early life could perhaps have been much like the prior universe's Samantha's. This would mean Eddie likely was adopted and grew up in a home with at least one parent, thus making him the only Richtofen to not grow up an orphan. These factors would result in this Eddie Richtofen becoming distinctively different than any prior incarnation, and now the only Richtofen left after Primus and Ultimus Richtofen were both wiped from existence after Tag der Toten. This family were also likely Americans, considering the high rank that Eddie holds within the American government, and these positions largely being kept away from immigrants at the time. This can be interpreted due to the less Germanized and almost American accent that we hear from his distorted voice in the intel. We know Eddie is also fluent in Russian. From here, Eddie would grow into a man serving time in the military as a pilot known as the Blue Baron, a reference to the real-life pilot of the Red Baron, and the fact that Richthofen's representation color has always been blue.
I told you before, their eyes should be blue.
Using this to garner trust in the American government, he would find his way into the high-ranking position of Associate Deputy Director at the Department of Extra-Regular Activities, a shadow subgroup under the Directorate of Science and Technology, specializing in clandestine sciences and the paranormal. It was likely around this point that Eddie also met with the group who he answers to throughout Cold War Zombies, and who we believe to be the modern-day incarnation of the Societe Occult. In meeting these people and working for the Department of Extra-Regular Activities, Eddie would also manage to acquire various artifacts and journals from the era of Vanguard Zombies, and likely at least parts of the Tome of Rituals as well. We know Eddie holds these objects by the time Requiem was formed, as he places all of them in Requiem's archives, and likely used the artifacts to create the technological field upgrades, the ones used in Cold War Zombies. At some point around this time, Eddie would also likely have met his wife. While we do not know much about her, we see both a wife and son featured in a photograph with Eddie on his desk at the end of Forsaken, so we know he must have been with her long enough to get married and have a child, a boy that we think is named Samuel. If our assumption is true, potentially Eddie gave his son this name in memory of Samuel Stullinger, as some of the last words Eddie would have heard in the old multiverse would have been that of Ultimus Richtofen apologizing to Stullinger as he faded away into the Dark Ether, the guilt of which may have been haunting the young Eddie throughout his new life. This family that he would build during this time would prove to be a major driving force behind his actions from this point forward. A year later, Samantha Maxis was recruited into the BND, the West German Intelligence Service. On October 18th, 1979, the CIA formed a joint task force with the MI6 in order to find and kill Mason, Hudson, and Weaver in what they dubbed Operation Charybdis. The kill order, however, was eventually eventually rescinded by none other than Eddie Richtofen himself, and the trio was spared as they continued to work with the CIA. By 1979, Samantha was placed on assignment in Iran and was caught up in the revolution when the Shah was overthrown, as the CIA and Western intelligence agencies worked together to ensure the Shah's safe extraction to the United States. Many diplomats and Western citizens were being left behind. Going directly against the orders of his superiors, CIA operative Gregory Weaver ordered for her to be extracted out of the country, off the books, marking the beginning of a strong bond forming between the two spies. Whilst he still maintains and wears an eye patch after his eye was gouged out by Colonel Lev Kravchenko. At a later point, Weaver lets Samantha know that he has a target of particular interest and needs intel from her to find him. She does just that. Samantha gives Weaver the intel on his location and informs him that the target's son will be out of the house and with his mother, giving Weaver the time he needs to accomplish his mission. Weaver goes to take out his target, but something goes horribly wrong. After believing he had killed the target, Weaver lit the house on fire to cover his tracks, only at that point realizing the target's son, Samuel, and his wife were also inside. Samantha was waiting for a phone call from Weaver from 10 to 12 o'clock until she heard about an explosion on TV, distressing her to the point of sleeplessness. At 3 AM, Weaver arrived at Samantha's apartment, bloodied and wounded, and wept at what he had done. While crying, Weaver mumbled about covering his tracks after a hit and how sorry he was. He told Samantha that the boy was supposed to be staying with his mother, but in reality was inside the house as it burned to the ground, only to later find out that both the mother and son were inside. Weaver and Samantha Maxis would be forever traumatized with guilt. Samantha would later state that she believes these events will later come back to haunt them. It is believed that this target was seemingly none other than Eddie Richtofen himself, and Weaver may have mistakenly killed his wife and son. His name being Samuel is part of what leads us to believe this to be possibly the case. If so, this event likely took place on American soil. This is just speculation, but heavily implied in the game's intel. I will discuss more on this subject matter nearer to the end of the video, and, if true, what this could mean for Eddie's motivations and the future story. During the course of Cold War's Onslaught maps, Eddie would also enlist one more member into the Department of Requiem. During the time that the Echelon facility became overrun with the undead, one SEA analyst named Eric Jaworski would survive the ordeal and make various theories about the events around him. He would write all of this down in case he did not survive the chaos. H. Meyer, Requiem Station's Berlin officer, would find Eric Jaworski alive and on the director's orders would send him to Requiem's headquarters. From this we can see that Eric Jaworski's wife is truly missing, but we do not know what happened to her, nor if the communications from the Dark Ether were truly her or the Forsaken. What is interesting to note is that Eric would be placed under Carver in the Containment and Security Department, and is likely the person next to Carver in Forsaken's ending cutscene, and we do not see him arrested. Perhaps the director still has plans for him, considering that he saw potential in him, but so far Eric has not reappeared in the story since Echelon, so he's a potential character we may see next game. So that's a good recap of everything you need to know regarding Samantha and Eddie that will be important moving forward to the storyline. But what is next? Firstly, the Dark Ether entities known as the Old Ones in Vanguard Zombies, now back in the Dark Ether, likely leave the Special Forces team and go back to their lives in the Dark Ether. Due to the power vacuum left by Cortifex, it's entirely possible that they devolve into fighting amongst themselves, but regardless, they are all consumed by the onset of Zykov. Zykov himself is likely the next Archon following Cortifex, this explaining the looming question in Cold War of just how did Zykov get so much power so quickly. Zykov even noted of stumbling along a giant deceased Elder God in the Dark Ether that looked as if it had been in battle, that of which could have been the remnants of Cortifex that he went on to consume. He also made note of a giant futuristic mechanical-like device in the Dark Ether, and I wonder if this could have been the construct since it does have a futuristic design. Due to Zykov consuming all of the Old Ones and their powers, that is why he was able to use their powers against us in the final moments and likely was able to raise the dead thanks to the consumption of Cortifex. Another loose end is Mr. Pigs. This is the bunny rabbit that has replaced Samantha's teddy bear in the mystery box and also aids the players with rewards throughout the Vanguard and Cold War Zombies maps. Given his appearance in Vanguard Zombies, it suggests that he may in fact be the child of Cortifex and Syraxis, and the cruelty that Cortifex enacted on the child was transforming him into the form of Mr. Pigs. Given Cortifex can morph the physical forms of other entities such as the Decimator, he could have done the same thing to this unwanted child. Mr. Pigs has actual teeth, he is ostensibly alive, and he may actually have a possible tie-in to Eddie Richtofen's son. If he, Eddie Richtofen, was indeed Weaver's target, like I suggested earlier, it explains the scar along his throat that you can see on his Cold War Zombies model, as well as the other injuries on his face, and also what happened to his wife and son. Eddie likely chose to use the knowledge of the Dark Ether that he had to save his son and sent him into the Dark Ether to manifest as an ethereal orb, or maybe it happened via some other way. For example, I don't know if Samantha Samantha Maxis somehow managed to open up a portal for him or something else. But regardless of the how, it seems like the thoughts and sentience of Samuel somehow ended up in the Dark Ether. We previously believed that his son may have been trapped inside an artifact, that being the rabbit Mr. Peaks. This rabbit represents the promise to his son that he will rescue him, and that Samuel will escape the Dark Ether, based on an old Dark Ether saying from long ago.
Well, I can honestly say I never imagined being in this position. I mean, look at us, all buddy. I'm not going to apologize for all the terrible things I have done, because frankly, I'm not sorry for anything. Yeah, I've had the time of my life. Now I know you'll probably never really trust me, and even now, you'll be expecting me to pull some last-minute rabbit out of a hat. A big rabbit of betrayal.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thank you, Dennis. I knew I could rely on you. So, do you have a rabbit of betrayal? If I'm honest, I've been expecting one since we all got together. Sadly, no. I am all out of rabbits.
Ultimus Richtofen claimed he was all out of rabbits when he didn't have a last-minute moment of betrayal in the ending of Tag the Toten, where they all had to die to reset the universe. The Forsaken is aware of this infamous saying that has clearly echoed throughout the Dark Ether.
But all good things must come to an end. As the old Dark Ether saying goes, you're all out of rabbits.
Was them or me?
Do you know what that means? It means no more escapes. This time, no one gets out alive. Bye-bye.
Now it seems that Richtofen does indeed remember this, but this time he has a rabbit in his hat. This rabbit could be key to Samuel's survival, keeping him safe in the dark place. Described as liking to play hide and seek, and the note describing this just so happens to be burnt, just as him and his mother apparently were. Mr. Peaks is described as living in the boy's hat, and we even have an emote showing Mr. Peaks being pulled from a hat, so this surely has to be referencing that. So what is Richtofen's grand scheme that he is wanting to pull from the hat? Well, here's the thing, it makes more sense that the rabbit, like I stated earlier, is actually Cortifex and Syraxis' child that Cortifex did not want to keep, and the rabbit is not Eddie's son. Mr. Peaks is present in the mystery box in Vanguard Zombies well before the events of Black Ops Cold War and before Samuel seems to have been sent into the Dark Ether. This would be a big plot twist and would make a lot of sense. Two children helping each other stay safe in the dark place. They may have bonded together over that shared innocence. Since they are both children, it would explain as to why the red orb is attracted to the rabbit in the second Outbreak main quest. That could be the essence of Eddie's son trapped in the Dark Ether. The rabbit may be protecting Samuel's essence, but what is an ethereal orb? They seem to naturally form whenever someone is around a Dark Ether crystal for too long, or perhaps even consumes one. The crystals take their memories and turn them into an ethereal orb, which is held together by primordial Ethereum. So maybe Eddie Richtofen, since he had prior knowledge of the Dark Ether, might have had some crystals or other Dark Ether artifacts lying around in his house, and when it was burnt to the ground, one of those artifacts or crystals may have activated, causing him to be propelled into the Dark Ether. But that's just a theory. Like I said before, the how he got in there isn't the most important thing, just that it seems like he has. These orbs aren't just mindless, inanimate objects, but rather living entities that can feel and even speak. If Eddie's son somehow became an orb, then it gives Eddie a chance to somehow bring him back. The orb may be intrinsically linked with Mr. Peaks. Supporting this is a piece of intel from Piotr in the Dark Ether, where he says that the ethereal orbs are made of memories, and as well as an American spy who is Peter McCain and a Russian scientist, Dr. Gersh, it seems that in the Broken Cycle, McCain and Gersh ended up in the Dark Ether, since Grod Crovey never happened. He also encountered an orb with the memories of a child, and they were incredibly special, in that it could cross between worlds, like Piotr himself, and that its memories are incredibly powerful. So although this is heavily speculative, that's my best guess so far. We've accidentally killed Eddie's child, motivating him to become the director and carry out his agenda, his child of which somehow ended up as an ethereal orb and bonded with Mr. Peaks, the abandoned child of Cortifex artifacts and Syraxis. It's a lot to take in, I know, but it leads to interesting implications, because Samantha believes that the child is scared but dangerous, and Mr. Peaks may want to seek revenge for what Cortifex did to him. Like I said, this is all just theory based, but there's a lot of supporting evidence for this. It could be completely wrong. In terms of Gabriel Kraft, who is still very much alive by the end of Vanguard Zombies, it is unlikely that he survives until the 1980s, given the fact that he would likely be the first person Requiem would want to hire, but it's entirely possible that he influences the story we see in Cold War in a more indirect way. As we saw in Cold War, his notes are present in the Requiem archives, so that relationship is likely something we will learn about in the sequel to Black Ops Cold War, and we may see a lot of intel pieces and radios referencing Gabriel Kraft from the past. It is worth noting that the Zealot Spragmos prophesizes on the ancient parchment for the Crystal Axe that the Old Ones will return post the ending of Cold War Zombies.
You will learn more in time. Our ways are of the old world. We will not be forgotten.
With the Forsaken captured in the containment chamber, it seems to have freed the Old Ones he consumed. The Construct could also play a major role next game too, with the potential for a new Archon. Maybe that could end up being Samantha Maxis, who is now trapped in the Dark Ether, as she sacrificed herself to trap the Forsaken, as well as seal the Dark Ether, after she was manipulated by Eddie Richtofen, lamenting that she is a good soul, and of course, Richtofen interrogated and brainwashed her in Block 8 to better harness her powers. Her being trapped in the Dark Ether seems like it is a goal for Richtofen's Project Janus as well. Only time will tell, however. The Construct does seem to do more than just electing Archons and determines fate in the Dark Ether, so it could play a major role in the future story in another fashion, even. What's interesting about the idea of Samantha being the next Archon, though, is that by the time we reach 1990, 5 years after Forsaken, Sam may have been in the Dark Ether for 50 years due to time passing at a different rate in there, meaning she might end up being an Elder God herself. We learn in Forsaken that Zykov was the very first human to live long enough to become an Elder God. Could she be the second? And all the while, Peck, Gorev, Jaeger, and Ravenov are left to try and survive, either working for or running from the director and his master plan. The Forsaken does allude to Samantha killing all of the crew, but this could just be manipulation. Will Peck be working for or against the director this time? I like to think the latter, as we see a drastic shift in his character after the 5-year gap. He'll have a better understanding of what Eddie is up to than any other, since communicating with him as a mole. The final and most important loose end to be aware of regarding the future story in Treyarch's next game, the sequel to Cold War Zombies, is Project Janus. The ending of Cold War Zombies leaves Eddie with all of his side goals accomplished, now in control of the Forsaken inside its containment chamber, Samantha trapped inside the Dark Ether, Weaver in prison, and the rest of the Requiem department leads, and the strike team contained in Black Site 13. We do not know where Black Site 13 is, but we can assume that it could potentially be that spot in the Pacific where Peck is heading, like I suggested earlier, or it could even be one of the facilities currently being constructed by Eddie Richtofen in West Virginia. It is important to note that it isn't necessarily implied to be a prison, but rather a containment unit, perhaps due to the strike team's exposure to Ethereum. Anyways, regarding Project Janus, in ancient Roman religion and myth, Janus is the god of beginnings, gateways, transitions, time, duality, and endings. The redacted board of directors are the key stakeholders in it, and it requires a stable gateway to the Dark Ether. But besides that, we don't really know much about what it is, besides the fact that Eddie likely has his own agenda for it outside of this shadowy organization. With Samantha out of the way, Eddie's now able to return his full focus to Janus. What we do know is that he is currently digging underground tunnels in rural West Virginia, importing a lot of resources there, including 5,000 tons of steel as the first stages of his plan. They have been hiring scientists, military personnel, operations personnel, and custodians. They used the cover story of a nuclear power plant tower failing and leaking to evacuate the locals. As predicted, a few locals weren't exactly keen on giving up their land and asserting their rights as American citizens to protect their property. They plan on starting construction on a giant wall around this area. Eddie has worked tirelessly throughout the storyline to make sure that Project Janus stays hidden from anyone who is not involved. One example can be seen here in this cipher from Strauss to Gray, where Strauss is making very sure that only Gray will see his communication and that she tells absolutely no one about it. Strauss says to Gray, "Elizabeth, there is a new directive coming and I wanted you to hear it from me first. Perhaps it will spare you the initial shock when you are informed in person. There is a new project in development that will require a great deal of our Ethereum reserves. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, this means that some of your research will be put on hold indefinitely, and you are not the only one affected by this. I've been informed that half of all future Ethereum harvests recovered from my extraction rockets will also be diverted to this project. Now I want to leave you with a question. Be very careful who you mention this to. What do you know about Project Janus? For your eyes only, am I crystal clear? Even with this information, we still cannot confidently say what Project Janus entails, but we can say that the plan is likely twofold. To satisfy the corporation he is working for, likely a modern day version of the Societe cult, and making them think they are using the Dark Ether to their own personal advantage, while he possibly secretly advances his own plans to save his son, by attempting to restore his life, while also getting back at those who hurt him the most. This explains the name Janus having two faces. Eddie puts on a front to those he uses as pawns, such as this redacted group, whilst also having his own secret agenda. Maybe his entire plan has been trying to rescue his son, and in turn free the old ones, who Zykov consumed to absorb their powers and become the Forsaken. If the old ones are returning as the Zealot Spragmos prophesies, then this would be thanks to Eddie's nudging by trapping Zykov in the containment chamber to free them. Eddie may have wanted to free them to try contact Cortifex to possibly try and find a way to rescue his son through Mr. Peaks, which could have interesting implications if Mr. Peaks helped us on the maps, because he wants us to free the old ones to potentially get back at Cortifex for changing him into this creature. Very little is currently known about the corporation aiding Janus. The one time we see their name mentioned in the document, it is redacted and censored out, but they require a gateway to the Dark Ether, considering that the corporate entity he is working with expressed dissatisfaction that he had Requiem close Valentina's gateway in Mauer des Toten, as well as the massive amounts of Ethereum seemingly required to accomplish it. He responded to the corporation by simply saying that this gateway would have allowed the escape of the Forsaken, and this would be awful for them because the world would surely fall to destruction, and the death of most people in the world would certainly disappoint their stockholders. That's all they care about. He did, however, promise he would deliver what they wanted in time. It seems Eddie and the corporation may want to open a gateway for two entirely different reasons, and once it is open, Eddie will dupe them for his own goal that may involve his son. It is very likely this corporation and the Societe cult are a modern day version of the classic Illuminati from the Ether storyline, as they are a mysterious organization that Eddie is working with to further his own goals, whilst also taking advantage of them. As for now, we will have to wait for Treyarch's next game to see the continuation of Eddie's plan, but I think it's important to close out this segment by summarizing Eddie's personality. When Eddie was interrogating Samantha Maxis, Samantha says, "You don't know anything about me." Eddie says, "Really? I think you are going to be very surprised." As a child, Eddie's personality is nothing substandard for a young boy, although he is a bit stubborn, as noted by his unwillingness to share his toys with Samantha and his insistence that Samantha doesn't know enough about zombies in the games they play. Eddie's personality as an adult is one of cold calculation, being just as manipulative as Primus and Ultimus Richtofen, though unlike them, he seemingly possesses no desire for recognition, and in fact goes out of his way to ensure people don't know who he is. Indicating his ego may be somewhat more in check, Eddie is highly manipulative and scheming. Eddie does not seem to have any attachment to his subordinates at Requiem, as seen with his willingness to arrest the entirety of the Requiem senior staff once he no longer has any use for them. Additionally, he is shown to take extreme measures in order to achieve the means he needs, purposely putting other lives at risk if he views the situation as requiring it, such as when he threatened to have Elizabeth Grey killed if Samantha Maxis didn't kill a captured Omega soldier within her powers. Eddie does, however, seem to at least love his family, as he keeps a picture of them at his desk. Along with Samantha, Eddie is the only survivor of the previous multiverse. Unlike Sam, Eddie seems to have retained some memories of prior events, as seen with the knowledge of Samantha's birth, as well as having a snow globe of Dr. Monty's house on his desk. Samantha appears to only very vaguely remember things after getting amnesia during the events of Firebase C, so Eddie has a massive one-up on her, and he was able to use that to his advantage when interrogating her. Due to this sheer fact, he likely knows more about the Dark Ether than anyone else on Earth. But with Samantha Maxis being trapped in the Dark Ether, maybe that amnesia will start to slip and she'll start to retain more and more memories and eventually everything. And she is going to feel a lot of hurt and pain when all of that old trauma is brought back up again, and once she pieces together the fact that Eddie Richtofen was the one interrogating her, since she doesn't know his identity, she is going to be furious, and I don't know what is going to happen, especially once she has gained all of those powers in the Dark Ether and becomes a lot stronger. All out war is going to break out. I could definitely see a lot of that anger and rage leading to her becoming the Archon or a powerful Elder God in the Dark Ether and her turning to evil, but we'll have to wait and see. As a side note, a lot of people were curious after the release of Shinonuma Reborn, as in a piece of intel, Gabriel Kraft mentions that the artifacts of the Dark Ether are similar to items mentioned by an Alistair Rhodes, called Sentinel artifacts. Many people have taken this to mean that the Chaos storyline is canon to Black Ops Cold War. However, this isn't necessarily the case. When Kraft mentions Rhodes, he says he is an amateur demonologist, and that the Sentinel supernatural artifacts he wrote about were never found. This is a huge contrast to the Chaos storyline, where Alistair Rhodes is a world-famous archaeologist. This likely points to the idea that whilst there is an Alistair Rhodes in this dimension, none of the supernatural aspects of the Chaos storyline exist, leading Rhodes to essentially be a nobody. The Chaos story more than likely existed within the prior multiverse that was reset on Tag de Toten with no real crossover to our old story. What is interesting, however, is that Treyarch are taking ideas and themes from Chaos that were never really fleshed out and reusing them for the Dark Ether saga, such as the idea of entities from another dimension altering the course of human history, or a secret society in control of Western civilization. As a result, we may potentially see familiar faces from Chaos return in the future, but they will likely be very different from their counterparts from within that old storyline. Yes, Jason Blundell previously said that Chaos is not canon at all to the Ether story. However, he has left, and I guess Treyarch have changed their plans and decided to bring back elements from Chaos. So I would definitely expect the next game to see some tie-ins with Chaos, but I don't think they'll be directly. I just think they'll reuse a lot of themes and different elements from the Chaos story, but it won't mean that the full storyline is canon to the Dark Ether, if that makes any sense. With that being said, that's everything we know about the COD 2024 Zombies story thus far. Gameplay and storyline wise, there's a lot of setup in Cold War and Vanguard that's integral to knowing where we are heading next, and I can't wait to see what Treyarch have been cooking. With that being said, thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you on the next one.